Welcome to the table, a group of smiling, great, young-looking people that are going to be here today. And I'm not talking about Senator Girdler. I'm talking about the young people that are in attendance for today. But Senator Girdler, I know you've got some guests here. If you would, please make your way to the table here. And any of your guests, I know we may have to pull some chairs up there. But the topic today you're presenting on is on child abuse and neglect awareness and prevention. And so, Senator, I'm going to give you the floor for introductory remarks, and we'll get right into the presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Wise, and I appreciate you allowing us to do this today. Ms. Underwood had called my office here sometime back, and these students were making some bills. They had about 6 bills, and they wanted me to come by and go over the bills and see what I thought. I got over there and found out that they taught me a few things, obviously. So I told them when I left, I said, y'all pick out one bill and we'll write a bill for it and we'll present it. So about 3 weeks later, she calls me and says, we've got our bill ready and we're going to go. And so this is what they come up with. And it happened to coincide at the same time with Senator Alvarado had a bill he'd already put forth, so I put forth a resolution. And this is the students that wrote the resolution, and that's the teacher, Ms. Underwood, and over here's the principal of the Boyle County Middle School. So with that said, they are the participants. I'm just going to watch, and they've done a great job, and they're very impressive. So if I can, I'll just turn it over to Ms. Underwood and let them go from there.
That sounds great, Senator. And I also want to make everyone aware we do have a guest that's on the line, Ms. Jenna Quinn, who is going to be joining us by teleconference. So, Ms. Underwood, the floor is yours. If you would introduce yourselves and your guest.
Thank you so much. Senator Wise and other respected members of the Education Committee. Thank you for allowing us to speak with you today. I am Amanda Underwood, a teacher at Boyle County Middle School. I am also the sponsor of our Y Club, which is a wonderful organization that encourages citizens and students especially to use their voices to try to enact change in the world. And today I am joined with 3 of my world changers. I have Kennedy Aulick and Addison Woodard and Brooklyn Rockhold, and they are all going to speak with you today about an idea that they have taken hold of and are very passionate about. I stand with them today to fight a growing epidemic that is plaguing our great Commonwealth, child abuse. These young ladies have worked on a proposal regarding child abuse education and its implementation across Kentucky schools. As these young ladies researched their idea, they discovered that 20 states across the nation have laws mandating such education in their schools. An additional 9 states have laws encouraging this type of education in their school systems. These laws fall under the category of Jenna Quinn's laws. In recognition of Jenna Quinn, a triumphant survivor of sexual abuse, author, and TED speaker, she is a warrior against sexual abuse of children and adolescents and encourages schools to adopt age-appropriate curriculum on child sexual abuse and maltreatment. Mrs. Quinn joins us today via telephone to encourage this proposal as well. Ms. Quinn, are you with us?
Hello, yes, this is Jenna Quinn. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And we're so glad you could join us. Would you like to chime in on this topic?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again, Senator Wise, and the other members of the committee and this wonderful class for taking on this project. So my name is Jenna Quinn, as was stated, and I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. Jenna's Law, or also known as the Jenna Quinn Law, or Senate Bill 68 in Kentucky, is named for me and my story. Some of you have heard my story, some of you have not. And I was asked to really speak about the big picture here, specifically in terms of child sexual abuse. I know it's not a fun topic, it's not a comfortable topic, but I do think it's important for us to understand its prevalence and effects in our society. So we know that it's estimated that 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused before the age of 18. It's also estimated 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. And there is about 42 million survivors of child sexual abuse just in our country alone, 42 million. And just to give you a comparison, this is about 2 times the amount of Americans living with cancer. And we all know someone, who has suffered with cancer and battled cancer. What's interesting about child sexual abuse is that kids, we don't stay kids. We grow up. But unfortunately, the damage is very great. The trauma is very great for children that have experienced this, whether it was a one-time event or it happens, multiple times over years. And so I just want to read some of the effects according to studies and give you an idea of the estimated lifetime cost, the burden that this carries in our economy. So victims are about 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, about 6 times more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, 13 times more likely to abuse alcohol, 26 times more likely to abuse drugs, and 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide. And so the average lifetime cost per victim is over $830,000. Interestingly enough, these costs are mostly paid for by the taxpayer. We're looking at health care, we're looking at criminal justice costs, we're looking at child welfare, we're looking at special education and productivity losses because, as I said, kids, they don't stay kids. They grow up. And what's unfortunate about this crime, and I'm going to give some good numbers here in a minute, but unfortunately, over 90% of the time a child is abused by someone that they know, but it's not just someone that they know, it's someone that they trust. And that's what makes this so difficult for kids to tell. Oftentimes, they feel responsible. They feel they're the ones to blame. And it's very difficult to tell on someone that you know and trust and sometimes love if it's a family member. And so we see now it's estimated 2/3 of children don't tell right away. 2/3 of children. And about half of disclosures are after 5 years. And some, unfortunately, never tell or have not told. But the good news in all of this is that, research and studies have shown that my favorite number is from the Child Molestation Research and Prevention Institute, and they have said that 95% of child sexual abuse is preventable through proper education. For me, I came from a very close family, and for me, this was never mentioned in any of my safe places. I never got, body safety awareness. And so because this was never, discussed at home or at school or in church or any of my safe places, I concluded, well, this must be something that's better left unspoken. And that's the message that we send to kids when we don't open that door of communication for them. And of course, there's an age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate way to do that. And so, we really encourage and, hope that the Education Committee will consider taking this on again now for another session. And hopefully we can get more children the help that they need so that they don't have to carry this into adulthood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn, for working with us on this, and I appreciate your collaboration with this. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my students. First speaking is going to be Miss Addison Woodard.
This is Allison's story. I was very young when I was sexually abused by someone known to my family. Looking back, it feels like I lost my childhood. After the abuse, I started isolating myself from my family and friends and had problems sleeping with night terrors. I used to find it difficult to concentrate in school and had problems remembering stuff. To cope, I used self-harm. I told my family what had happened to me when I was a teenager. It had taken me 10 years to tell anyone what I had been through. I'm Addison Woodard, an 8th grader at Boyle County Middle School. We hear these stories all the time. Often the victims are strangers. but their stories makes us wish that we could have done something for them. While stories like Allison's are heart-wrenching, the statistics give us an even better picture as to why Kentucky needs this legislation. A study from Duke University found that victims of child abuse were on average 25% more likely to drop out of high school than their peers. According to the National Institute of Health, 80% of those who have attempted suicide have a history of child abuse. Obviously, child abuse is a problem nationwide and leaves long-lasting scars on those who are victims, but let's bring this issue closer to home. In Kentucky, there are 22 victims of child abuse for every 1,000 children. The national average is 9. Kentucky has the highest rate of child abuse victims than any other state, according to the report from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. From 2013 through 2017, the number of child abuse victims in Kentucky grew more than 27%. In 2017, Kentucky averaged 15 new victims of child abuse for every 1,000 children annually. We have the second highest amount of new victims in the nation. This number has steadily increased since 2013 as well. We are currently moving in the wrong direction with this epidemic. Yet we want to be number one in academics or sports, but not in child abuse. This isn't what we want our great Commonwealth to be known for.
Alex suffered a life of abuse at the hands of his father. His father should have protected him, defended him, and encouraged him, yet he was the one that Alex feared the most. Alex was cheated of a father figure, a safe home, and a childhood. His father never received any consequences for his actions because no one ever suspected the abuse. Alex will forever have mental scars and trust issues as a result. Some of the stories we hear are about strangers, but not this one. You see, Alex is a friend of mine. He is one of the nicest people I have ever known, and if somebody had suspected the abuse and reported it, then he may not have the emotional and mental scars that he has today. I am Kennedy Aulick, a freshman at Boyle County High School. Stories like Alex's need to stop. We have the opportunity to help others in his similar situation. This legislation will be the difference for some victims, like my friend, but we are optimistic about the potential impact of this legislation. Research has shown that friends and classmates are 10 times more likely to report the abuse than the victims themselves. In fact, of all reporting sources, victims are the second least likely to report. The only source less than the victims are the abusers themselves. And this is why it is essential that we educate students about the signs of abuse and provide them knowledge of how to report when abuse is suspected. While it won't stop every case, it will stop many. And for every child that is saved, this legislation will have been successful. Some concerns about this legislation may include how much reporting will happen when this is passed. Research has indicated that with this legislation, in the first year or two, reports do increase, but they drop and stabilize soon after. Other concerns include false reporting. Studies indicate that false reportings only account for 2 to 8% of total reports. We recommend this education provide information distinguishing child abuse and discipline. This will eliminate some false reporting. So if we are concerned about the number of reports that will be made, that fear is unfounded. In other states who have passed this legislation, no additional expenses have been required. The materials for this education already exist if the Kentucky Department of Education wishes to utilize them. Louisville, Kentucky uses Speak Up, Be Safe throughout Louisville's Catholic schools. According to our contact in the Archdiocese, Lisa Schultz, Superintendent of Catholic Schools, they use a comprehensive approach which teaches students how to identify all types of child abuse, including physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, as well as neglect, bullying, and cyberbullying. Since they have implemented this education in their curriculum, they have noticed an increase in the number of reports. Students are coming forward and mentioning Speak Up, Be Safe by name in their report. The Archdiocese is tremendously pleased with the reactions they have seen from students, parents, and staff. Don't all of Kentucky school children deserve this type of education, and not just in those Louisville private sectors?
My mother was a victim of domestic violence for years. The domestic violence she experienced was at the hands of my biological father. He was not only violent to my mother, but he was abusive to my brother and I as well. After my mother removed us from the situation, attempting to protect us from him, we still suffered abuse during our legally required visitations to his house. As I have gotten older and become more aware of what child abuse is, I realized the things that he did to my brother and I were abusive. We endured a lot of physical and emotional abuse, not only by him, but by his family members. If the schools had this legislation back then, I would not have grown up thinking this kind of thing was normal. Now, I realize that my mother has always fought so hard to keep us away from him and his family. This is why I want to fight for those victims who don't have someone like my mom on their side. Sometimes the victims are strangers. Sometimes they are friends. And sometimes they are staring us straight in the face, we don't even realize it. My name is Brooklyn Rockhold, and I am a freshman at Boyle County High School, and I was a victim of child abuse. Senate Bill 68, an act relating to child abuse education, and Senate Joint Resolution 38, a joint resolution relating to child abuse and neglect awareness, are past due. Currently, 28 states across the nation have some form of child abuse and child sexual abuse education in their schools. Those states have an average of 11 child abuse cases per 1,000 children. Kentucky currently has 22 cases per 1,000 children. This legislation encourages Kentucky schools to recognize April 6th of each year as Child Abuse Prevention Day and requires schools across Kentucky to provide age-appropriate education to all students on or around this day. The Kentucky Department of Education will provide educational resources regarding all forms of child abuse to be taught to students in all grades across the Commonwealth. All schools will provide age-appropriate information to all students, including the signs of child abuse, neglect, and child sexual abuse, information on how to report child abuse and child sexual abuse, and who to reach out to at school if abuse is suspected. Kentucky children deserve to know that they are not alone and that child abuse is not acceptable in any circumstance. Education is the first step in battling this epidemic.
She sat in my 6th grade classroom more than 170 days. She was classified as having an emotional and behavioral disorder. Often she appeared anxious. She had a reputation as being confrontational to authority. I was a second-year teacher at the time, and I was thoroughly trained in how to implement her IEP and her special education needs. I was not, however, at that time, trained in how to recognize the signs that were right in front of me every day. According to statistics, as an educator, I am 52 times more likely to report child abuse. Still, 170 days, she came to my classroom. In 170 days, I sent her home. I was sending her home to a grandfather who, on a regular basis, was forcing himself on her. She had been entrusted to his care because her mother no longer had use for her or her sister. She was 11 when she sat in my classroom. 4 years later, the abuse finally came to light when her sister decided to report it. I didn't save her from her abuser. I had more than 170 chances to see the abuse, and I failed her more than 170 times. This situation happened before KRS 156095, Section 7, went into effect. The most fundamental job I have as an educator is to ensure the safety of my students. We have an obligation to do more than we are currently doing. By educating our students on recognizing the signs of child abuse, we are battling this growing epidemic on 2 additional fronts. We are increasing the awareness of potential reporters, and we are empowering the victims to advocate for themselves. We have already waited too long. If we continue our recent trend, our great Commonwealth will exceed 35,000 cases of child abuse and neglect this year. We can no longer sit back and wait at the expense of our children. We know the severity of child abuse. We know the long-term implications. We know the monetary cost to society. And we have a plan. It's proven effective in other states. The only question now is, when do we get started and why have we waited so long? What could possibly be more important than the safety of our students? These are some of the sources that we used on this. Ms. Quinn, is there anything else you'd like to add in? She must have left us.
If there are any questions, I think that would be wonderful. If not, thank you for understanding that, this is a high prevalence and a high cost, but that we know there are solutions that we can put in place to help this growing epidemic.
We hear a lot of powerful testimony in all the various committees that we have, and this is one of the most powerful ones we've ever had in the Education Committee. I greatly appreciate the amount of research and that went into this. Ms. Underwood, I know you're very proud of your students.
Very much.
Young ladies, thank you all. And Brooklyn, thank you also for sharing your personal story and for everything that you did to do in this. It takes a lot of courage. And I admire each one of you all for being here today and to present in front of this Education Committee. I am going to open up for questions. We have a couple members. Senator Kerr, you're the first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to echo how much I appreciate you for coming today and for your courage in speaking out. And thank you, Senator Girdler, for bringing this before us. And I'd like to say at this time, I appreciate very much you bringing it before us again. And why have we waited so long? I ask you, why have we waited so long? I have brought this legislation. It's a matter of record. I'm not sure the sessions, but I have brought this legislation twice. One time I brought it and I was only allowed to have testimony only in the committee. Another time I brought it and it didn't get anywhere. I went before my leadership, none of whom are the leaders right now, I want to say, because this was several years ago. I went before my leadership in closed meeting and explained what I wanted to do, and basically they said gross. Gross. These men were offended that this should be brought up. I brought it also because I'm a victim of child abuse, and I was very public about that at the time. Before I was 8 years old, in 3 different scenarios, I was abused sexually. One was a good friend of my mother's teenage son. She would go over to visit her good friend, and he would take this little 3-4-year-old girl back into the bedroom and get an anatomy lesson from me. Another one was a distant cousin who is now deceased, and it would be at this giant family reunion. And he would take 2 of me and another female cousin and abuse us back in some room. I mean, this is when I'm like 3 and 5, but I remember them vividly. The third time it happened to me, some boys in the neighborhood in my little small town would run my bicycle off into the ditch and get an anatomy lesson on the female body. So, why have we waited so long? I don't have a clue. But thank you, and thank you, Senator Girdler, and hopefully this session. I will also say that this was bipartisan legislation. Representative Senator Jones filed the legislation also after my 2 tries because, I said, yeah, go for it. Maybe a man can get this through. So that's why one of the reasons we've waited so long is because we have not acted.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Senator Kerr. And there are way too many stories like yours, way too many stories. As the statistics show, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys. And being uncomfortable to speak about it is no longer an excuse. We are past due. We are past due. Kentucky is number 1 in the state for child abuse cases. And if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And it's time that we do something different.
Thank you, Senator Kerr. Representative Wilner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't really have a question, but I just want to thank you for your research, for your honesty, for your courage. I share your passion for this particular issue, and it just means a lot to me that you brought this to us. And it is, as my colleague said, long past time that we take this issue seriously and address it. And as you know, for children that this has happened to, without talking about it, they think they're the only ones it's happened to. The isolation of that experience can be addressed immediately through legislation like this. I will say that I worked in college counseling centers with 19, 20, 21-year-old women who had been abused as children. They were only, as 19, 20, 21-year-olds, beginning to understand that it was abuse, and how urgent it is that we not wait for folks to figure it out. This needs to be just part of the curriculum. Folks need to understand what healthy relationships are, where safe zones are, and this is so important to be talked about. So again, I just want to commend you. I want to thank you, and I look forward to voting for this legislation when it's brought to us in the next session. So thank you.
Representative Gibbons-Prunty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too was a victim as a young person, not real long, so it wasn't very traumatic, but I was the director of youth ministry for almost 20 years for the Diocese of Owensboro. Tried to get my youth ministers, tried to teach them the signs so they could identify as well, and that church could be a safe place. So I commend each and every one of you for speaking up, for what you've done. I would like to know if we could have access to the slides and to the research. We usually have a handout in our packet, but if you could send those to staff and get those to us. But I appreciate your all's efforts. Appreciate particularly you young girls for being here today and speaking up. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming today and presenting to us. This is a problem that's been long, if not ignored, at least dismissed. And we all know that if you ignore problems or dismiss problems, they become greater. So thank you for presenting that. One question I'll ask, and then if I could make a comment right after that. April the 6th, the date you guys have, obviously that's during a lot of schools' spring breaks. Do you have an alternative date for that recognition?
Well, we do realize that, so it would just be more of like either April 6th if they're in school, or any day like around it, like maybe a couple days before or after if it's like a weekend or they're on spring break. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be on Child Abuse Prevention Day.
Okay, thank you. And if I could make a comment, obviously this is a problem. You guys have given the evidence of that and the statistics that are involved in that. I think this is even more of a reason why we need to eliminate corporal punishment in our schools, because we have young people who are abused at home, whatever their home is, and we come to school in an environment where we're not their parents or family, and somebody at school strikes them for a discipline issue. So I think that needs to be brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any further questions or comments from any members? Representative Bojanowski.
Okay, so thank you very much, and I appreciate your draft legislation, and I would be voting for it. As a teacher, I'm wondering if April 6th is too late. I mean, should we have something implemented? How many of those 170 days could we have prevented if we, have something happen over the course of the year, possibly? So that's my only suggestion.
In the Catholic schools, in Louisville, as they had mentioned, we've been in contact with the Archdiocese, and this information we shared with them, and they've had a lot of success with the Speak Up, Be Safe program. They implement it twice a year at a minimum, where they have in the fall and in the spring, they implement this education, and then in the high school, at the high school level, they increase all of this information in their theology classes. But if we could, at a minimum, one day on Child Abuse Awareness Day, but more would be even better.
Once again, thank you so much for being here. Senator Girdler, thank you once again for bringing this to us. Look forward to working with you throughout the interim as we enter into the session with Senate Bill 68. Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to our agenda. Once again, thank you, Ms. Underwood. Thank you, students, for being here. Let's give these students a round of applause. Testimony. I do want to recognize my co-chair. As I mentioned earlier, she was traveling to get here from a 9/11 program. Co-chair Huff, good to see you here today. Next up on our agenda is going to be Dr. Jim Flynn.